this video I'm going to be looking at the canon of Resident Evil. But first, if you like the video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to check out all the links in the description below. Resident Evil 3 was released in April of 2020 to critical acclaim. But it was not without controversy, with many fans and newcomers having high praise for its visuals and character redesigns, whilst other long-term fans not impressed with the amount of cut content and overall length of the game. What Resident Evil 3 Remake does do is it closes the chapter on the Raccoon City saga. So now that dust is settled, what the remakes has done to the canon. Canon in Resident Evil has always been a little awkward, so if you're unfamiliar, I'll try to explain. At present, we have the 1998 and 1999 versions, known as the originals, and the 2019 and the 2020 versions, known as the remakes, or reimagines. For the purpose of this video, they'll be known as the remakes. So if you were born after the year 2000, you might not know that the latest Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 are actually based on original games. So we're going to have a look at their stories and compare it to the new ones and see if there is any story there at all. So we have the original Resident Evil, which was released in 1996, and it has two main characters. It has Chris and Jill. Now they both have their own separate stories. One of them goes into prison while the other one goes to the mansion, and they don't cross over until the very end. One of them can be saved from the prison. Now, if you're playing either one of them will save the character. So we've got Jill that will save Barry, and we've got Chris that will save Rebecca. But the problem with the first game is that Barry will never meet Rebecca, and Rebecca will never meet Barry. Yet all four of them survive the game. So already we're off to a start where it doesn't have a definitive canon ending to that game. So you have to use a bit of headcanon, maybe a bit of ignorance, but we know later on through further games and films that all four of them survived the mansion incident. Okay, so moving on, we have the Resident Evil 2. Now this was released in 1998, and again it has two main characters. It has Leon and Claire. They have their own campaigns, but where Resident Evil 2 differs from Resident Evil 1 is that their campaigns will affect each other. So whatever Leon will do in his campaign will affect Claire's. Now this can be if it was blowing up some debris, or it could be that you're leaving a gun for the other person. They're known as an A campaign and a B campaign. So you'll always start off with whichever character you pick first will be their A, and whichever character you play the second time it will be their B. So Leon A, it will be followed by Claire B. Now it's very well known that Claire A, Leon B is the canon story, although all four stories together do tell the whole story. But Claire A, Leon B is the only scenario in which Sherry, the girl on screen right now, she gets infected, and you can see that that is referenced in Resident Evil 6 with this clip.
So, you always been like that? The whole healing thing?
My dad was a scientist. He was working on BOWs when I was exposed. Luckily, I was treated with the vaccine before it was too late. But the virus adjusted and adapted. It's been a part of me ever since.
What happened to your father?
His research killed him. By the time he died, his body had mutated so much, he wasn't even recognizable.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's all right. Besides, I didn't walk out of it empty-handed.
Yeah, you got superpowers.
That's not what I meant. The people who saved me, Leon and Claire, are the closest friends I've ever had.
Okay, so moving on, we also have Resident Evil 3. Now this one was released in 1999, and this one only has Jill as the main character, and it's just one straight story. Yes, you do play as Carlos for a small bit, same as you do in the remake, but it's Jill's story, and it's her escaping from the city. So that one is quite straightforward. It does tie in with Resident Evil 2. It uses some of the assets that was already used in that game. So we move on to the remakes. Released in 2002 for the GameCube. It came out at the same time as Resident Evil 0. And it is literally a straight up remake of the first game, using nicer graphics, and it even added to the story as well. So we can happily replace the original with the remake. What it didn't do is it didn't fix the ending as well, which is really annoying. So again, they have their own separate stories, and both Barry and Rebecca both survive, but all four of them can't be seen at the helicopter at the end. So again, you have to use a bit of ignorance, maybe a bit of headcanon. My personal way of using the headcanon for the first game is that after playing Resident Evil 0, Rebecca is out in the field making her way down to the mansion. I like to think that she gets picked up in the helicopter as they're flying away just before it explodes, which you don't obviously see on screen. Alright, so let's have a look at Resident Evil 2. So now we have the original here. Now the new Resident Evil 2 that came out in 2019 doesn't replace the original. They changed too many things for it to be a straight up replacement like the first remake. So this now is going to sit alongside Resident Evil 2. Although it stayed quite faithful to the original plot, what it didn't have was the zapping system. And what it kind of semi-did. So they still get their own little stories, and Leon will meet Ada, and Claire will meet Sherry. So instead of having two separate campaigns which cross over, they have really one campaign that overlaps. And although they have their own people that they meet, and it kind of diverges off slightly, they still meet the same bosses. The same character will die in Leon's campaign as in Claire's campaign. So it's not quite as streamlined, in my opinion, as Resident Evil 2. But nevertheless, same to the other games. If you use a bit of headcanon, if you use a bit of ignorance, I personally find if you're doing a serious playthrough, instead of trying to do both characters like you would do with the original, just stick to one character and you get a more comprehensive narrative with that. It flows a lot better. Alright, so moving on to Resident Evil 3. We'll move Resident Evil 2 to the side here. This is the latest game. Resident Evil 3 came out this year, 2020. And similar to the original, it has one straight campaign. Again, you do play as Carlos, like the original, but it is about Jill. It's Jill's story. Similar to the original, this story uses some of the assets from Resident Evil 2, and it uses the remake Resident Evil 2 as their assets. So therefore, it can't be a replacement for the original Resident Evil 3, and it changes some of the story elements. So now we have a situation where we've got the original Resident Evil, and we've got two timelines now. We've got the original timeline, and everything meets back up with Resident Evil 4, and we've got the new timeline, and again everything matches up with Resident Evil 4. This is the second best option that we've got for the canon at the moment. First being that Capcom say, yes, this is the story of Resident Evil. This being the second, because at least then you're free to choose which path you want to take. However, this is not the approach that Capcom wanted to take. Initially, in an interview with Game Media, Capcom stated that Resident Evil 3 is a reimagining of a beloved original, and therefore the originals will still take precedence. Then, in an interview with Resident Evil Database, Capcom, probably in a move not to alienate either side of the fanbase, has now stated that every instance is a canon. So this means both Resident Evil 3, the original, and Resident Evil 3, the remake, took place. As you can imagine, this has caused a little confusion, as certain events contradict each other. For example, the Nemesis is killed in the Dead Factory in the original, but is also killed in S2 in the remake. This has also been backed up by the community manager stating that you can make your own lore. Rumours of a Resident Evil 4 remake have begun to surface, and in a Resident Evil Resistance update, the multiplayer section of Resident Evil 3 Remake, Capcom describes some of the lore around the Nemesis, this being the main enemy from the base game. In the interview, Capcom state that the purpose of the Nemesis was to try and recreate a Plagueis parasite. Now this, in the original timeline, was not discovered until Resident Evil 4. So this has fueled more speculation not only that Resident Evil 4 Remake is in development, it will also be tied more into the remake timeline. Dusk Golem, a Twitter user that knows more than most in the inner workings of Capcom, added that Resident Evil has always been loose with its canon, but any changes the remakes made will be the ones that are referenced in later games. Okay, so if I bring the graphic back on screen, here you can see this model works. Again, it would be better if Capcom picked a route. I think that in their current stance, where everything is canon, it's doing a real disservice not only to their older fans, but to the new ones too. I understand that new developers want to put their own mark on such an iconic franchise, and they wouldn't want to alienate new players by making what they've just paid top money for mean nothing. But why change story elements that overwrites previously established lore and leaves everything in such a mess? Final Fantasy VII Remake has just come out, and here on the box it clearly says Remake. This game has been made to replace the original, and they've embraced that and their story, and they want to make it better. Resident Evil 2 and 3 don't say remake or reimagine, it's just their numbered entry, and now we have 2 Resident Evil 2s and 2 Resident Evil 3s. For Final Fantasy, it doesn't really matter, as each game doesn't have a bearing on the next, but Resident Evil has a narrative, and events in one game can be, and are, referenced in another. What was once a rich story can now be summed up in short, like this. There was a place called Raccoon City, it had a zombie outbreak, some people survived, the city went boom. You decide what happened. So what do you think? Do you like the everything is canon idea? Or should they decide on a definitive route? And if so, which route should it be? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Links in the description to the articles mentioned in this video, and if you'd like to support the channel, you can do that in a couple of ways. Best way is to like and subscribe, but if you do want to go a bit further, my link to Green Man Gaming takes you to their site. If you plan on buying any games, no extra cost to you, but they will kick back a little love to me to improve this channel. And if you do want to go further than that, then there is a link into my Patreon as well. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing the next one.